one and a 0 on the other. There are various reasons why that's the case. When we get to those, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to explain. And then you go to the next column, 2019. That's what we're proposing for the 2019 budget. And then there's the following 5 years in addition. So with that said, I'm going to get started with the very first one in district-wide annual.
Hey, Jeff, do you just want to make note that the Finance Committee has previously met and reviewed this?
Oh, yeah, thank you. That's correct. We did recently meet, and we reviewed this. We went through it in quite detail. So the first line item here, the district-wide master planning, in 2019, you'll notice there's $0 budgeted, but then in the following years, we have $50,000. So there's an example where there is money budgeted, but what we'll do is we may bring it down in particular areas. So as we go through this plan, there may be money budgeted to a particular park or a particular facility for that. So the future dollars are essentially placeholders for potential projects. So with that said, I'm going to just open it up to questions as we walk through it.
My suggestion is just follow how we handled it at the Finance Committee, just go section by section.
Sure.
Okay.
So with district-wide annual, I've already touched on the first item. You'll see here the third item down, which is asphalt allowance, is the same thing. There's $0 in there, and that's because for the upcoming budget year, we will allocate those funds to the particular projects. So you'll see here as we go down where those dollars lie.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
Could you just refresh my memory about what we're doing at the Highland Park Country Club? Are we asphalting the existing cart paths there, and is that included in this?
So
Jerry, we don't know yet.
Oh.
That's yet to be determined, what we're going to do.
Right. Currently, all the cart paths are asphalted. They're, as part of the planning process, we'll be making a determination as to whether we're improving some paths, we're changing paths, we're removing paths. We're not sure yet what that looks like. But yes, a large portion of the asphalt funds for next year we've allocated to the country club for that exact
Okay,
purpose.
so it's the same budget.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's in here, but as mentioned, we don't know what it's going to look like yet.
Brian? I just want to note that at the Finance Committee, we spent probably an hour and a half going line by line through the 5-year capital plan. So if I don't ask a lot of questions, I mean, we spent a lot of time at the Finance Committee, and I asked a lot of questions, got a lot of answers.
I think you're sick.
Yeah, that something's wrong with me that I'm not asking questions, but I asked questions for an hour and a half already on this, so.
Okay.
I asked questions for about 8.5 minutes.
I know, exactly.
You're entitled to 5 more questions.
How many do I get?
I think what Cal is saying is that we did spend a lot of time.
I know
going
you
through
guys did.
Any other questions with district-wide?
Sorry. How bad is the emerald ash borer problem? Is it?
So this initially was in the capital budget because of the issue. A lot of it has been handled, and you see here, it then says general tree removal. It's kind of evolved into the latter. And you'll notice for 2019, there's significantly more budgeted, and a good portion of that is for the Highland Park Country Club plan. And we know there are a good number of trees there that we may need to take down, so that's where that's going to be addressed. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on to technology here. And it's the same thing you'll see there. There isn't a significant amount budgeted in the following years. And for the last 2 security cameras and security enhancement fobs, both of those items had funds budgeted, but they've been brought down to facilities, and we'll talk about that when we get to them. Right. And then the next section is parks equipment. So this is all of our district-wide parks equipment. It's all on replacement schedules, and so that's where these come from here. So if there aren't any questions there, I'm going to get into the actual parks. So the first one here, Brown Park, you'll notice in 2018 projected, there is money that we're anticipating to spend on tennis court and also ADA around the tennis court. These were, and what you notice there isn't anything budgeted in 2018 itself. That's because this is simply a carryover from last year's budget. Both of these projects started last year, but due to weather, we weren't able to wrap them up. So we carried that over to this year. So that's where it's being paid out this year, but it was actually budgeted last year. Any questions about Cloverdale? We're doing some court work, and we also have, in the future, we have a playground replacement scheduled and more court work. And all of the tennis court, the basketball courts, the playgrounds, these are also on replacement schedules. And just as a reminder, what happens is when they come up in our plan, we'll assess them to determine whether or not they need to be done. We can adjust them a couple years, maybe the dollar amounts, but for the most part, we follow a schedule for these.
Sorry, you're still on Cloverdale?
I can be, yeah.
I'm looking up at the tennis court rebuild. So what does that entail? Is that, tearing down the concrete, this playing surface and,
Oh, you're looking at Danny Kniff?
no? I think I'm looking at
It's
Cloverdale here.
Cloverdale's up here.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I looked at it on top. My bad.
Okay.
Very sorry. I moved ahead of you.
On Cloverdale Park, I haven't been there in a little bit. What's the status of the path that's around there? Was that redone, or I don't see that listed here as an item?
Yeah.
It's a screens path that's maintained by Ag Screen.
So there's been no issues with, no complaints, no issues with the circular path that goes around the park? Okay. Okay.
All right, do you want me to address your question about Danny Kniff? Yeah, so for this one here, it says tennis court rebuild. So what we're doing, we're actually going through the process of having a study done right now, because this is a court that has significant issues, and there's been significant damage to the court. So rather than just going in and just grinding and repaving, we want to go in and actually fix the problem. And so we're working on that right now, and then there's dollars budgeted next year to actually go in and repair the drainage and redo the courts.
One of the questions we asked at the Finance Committee was there any talk of transitioning any of our tennis courts, which we seem to have a lot of them, to pickleball courts, which now is a very popular game? And why don't you answer the question again for the
Yeah, absolutely.
Board member.
So that's correct. We've certainly had requests to have dedicated pickleball courts. Right now, we have some courts that are striped for both tennis and pickleball, and then there's a way to adjust the net so you can play pickleball. However, what we understand is there's a strong interest in having dedicated courts. When we do the Danny Kniff courts next year, our plan at this time is to convert 2 of those tennis courts into pickleball courts. We don't have the exact plan yet. It could give us 4 to 6 courts. So, or potentially even more. We'll have to do the layout, but it'll give us the opportunity to have dedicated pickleball courts. When we go a little further down, we have another park where we will be so at Woodridge is a park that right now we have with stripe for both pickleball and tennis. That's another park that we're looking at actually converting those to pickleball. We recently did a community meeting. We also feel that it's an ideal location because it has people already used to playing pickleball there. There's parking there, and its close proximity to Fink gives the neighbors in that area an opportunity to play tennis still.
Jeff, how are the pickleball courts different as far as how they're,
So they're significantly smaller,
okay?
and so you can actually orient them kind of perpendicular on a tennis court. Whereas like you can take, if this is a tennis court, and once again, the layout, it depends, we have to work it out, but theoretically, you could put pickleball courts like 3 courts this way, and they would play in this direction. So it opens up a lot more space. And the idea is we would want to put more than just a couple courts. We want to put several courts. Often, from what we heard, pickleball players would play in groups, so they want several courts.
Okay. So will we actually be losing tennis court space?
At Danny Kniff, we would eliminate 2 tennis courts, but we've looked at it. We've looked at all the courts in the district, and we felt that operationally this was by far the best. And if we were to put courts at Woodridge and also Danny Caniff. We feel that it actually gives a nice spread of location, two sides of town where we'll have,
Okay, but you feel we'll still have ample tennis court
yeah, staff do.
players? Okay.
We have more outdoor tennis courts than the average park district by far.
All right, if you want to move on to Kennedy, the only thing really in here was the work we recently did to replace that playground and upgrade that park. All right, so then for Fink, we did some asphalt work there this year with the courts and the disc golf goals, and then we also have some work scheduled for next year. And then you'll see we'll be doing a playground replacement in 2024. So we have that budgeted for right now. And then Lincoln, similar basketball court, patching and coloring, and also playground replacement. And for Moraine Park, I want to talk a little bit about this one. So the first item on here, repair retaining wall, beach walk. What this is as you're going down to the dog beach, you go down the steps, then there is kind of the historic stone path there, and it's really kind of slanting toward the ravine. And so we want to straighten that out. So we've had work done, we've had plans put together for that, and now that's implementing that. And then the next one there is the feasibility study. This is in conjunction with the city, and it's tied to the 2021 here, the ravine restoration work that may occur.
Is there going to be a more permanent solution to the fences and gates that are on the north, particularly on the north end? You know, the staff does a great job of when there's a terrible storm or whatever, it just rips those things apart.
Yeah, down at the actual dog beach.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, this is something we regularly receive feedback about. We certainly received it during as we're going through the process of the lakefront master plan update. It's something staff will look at. I will say, however, it's a real challenge because it's a harsh environment down there.
Yeah.
And it's very, very difficult to find anything that's going to really stay in place long term.
Right. Yeah, because now I noticed that there's, it's basically open for dogs to just kind of leave to the north. They can, and so that used to be a concern with my dog, but I know that they do a job, they just keep patching it up. I know, it's tough. Okay.
Any questions on Mooney? And then for Maroney Park, we have money allocated in 2021 for a playground replacement. And I'm just going to kind of jump ahead and reference the very bottom of this spreadsheet, and that is, at the very end, we have a number of items that staff have identified as potential projects, however, they are unfunded. And one thing you will see on there is something titled Maroney Park Redevelopment. And the idea here is right now we have a simple playground replacement in there, but staff have recognized that Maroney is a park where it may make sense to relocate the playground. It's kind of in a funky location. So that's a potential down the road that we may actually recommend changing these funds for this amount.
Is that on St. John's? Which one's Maroney?
St. John's and Cedar.
Yeah, okay, all right, that's it. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize it wasn't up here. Sorry, everyone.
It's on the final page.
There you go. And then we have Old Elm, it's more tennis, basketball, and playground replacements. Bless you. Port Clinton playground replacement.
You only get 2 pluses.
Yeah, so Port Clinton, we have a playground replacement, and also at Rory Deutsch, we have a playground replacement scheduled for 2020. No questions about any of those. We'll move on to Rosewood Beach. So, as everyone's familiar, the first line item here for Rosewood is the monitoring that's done down at Rosewood. And also, Those numbers include the potential for bringing sand in per the monitoring study. And then if we also look down to 2023, we've put funds in there if we choose to do beach nourishment on the actual swimming cells there, this would be the opportunity to do that. Any questions? Awesome. And then Rosewood Park. So we have funds in here that we're planning to spend next year to do some improvements to the staircase that goes from the upper park down to the lower. And that would most likely include, there are columns that are leaning with the bluff. And so we'd like to repair those, and we're also looking into putting a handrail down those steps. And then we have funds allocated for the ravine path, so the other path, the screenings path that goes down along the ravine to the beach. We've gone through the process of having some work done where we are, we've got a design to redo the drainage in the upper park, because as you're aware, that path regularly washes out. And so this would be to implement that plan to redo the drainage in the upper park, which would greatly impact that path and wouldn't regularly wash out, and then wash screenings into the ravine.
So is it currently draining from the top of the bluff into the ravine, and is the plan to have it drain out at the bottom of the ravine, or what's the plan?
Yeah, the idea, so right now at the top of the path, a lot of it just comes rushing down the path. And then there's a spot a little later where it comes out of the park and hits the path. So the idea would be to channel the water through the park, then we would be running a line under the path, and then it would discharge all the water into the ravine. And then Skokie River Woods, the money that's budgeted right now, and you see the majority of it, we're planning to expend in 2019. That's part of the path that we've got, basically from the Golf Learning Center area down to the lookout that we're planning on putting in, which is kind of tied into the Country Club project. All right, and then on to Sunset Woods. For Sunset Woods, what we have in 2020 is we've put money in for our playground replacement, and this would be 2 of the playgrounds which are in need of being replaced. This would be just a basic replacement for it. What we don't have in this plan right now are, and this is more tied into Greenprint, but funds for any type of master planning or even a smaller scale planning along the lines with the playgrounds and maybe looking at possibly changing the footprint or something for the playgrounds. So right now, this would be for just replacing those 2 playgrounds.
Talk to me about the lights. Because I noticed back in the district-wide on page 1, in 2022, you have $1 million placeholder for district-wide athletic lights, automation, and replacement. Does that include Sunset?
Yes, so what this is, this year, this is simply assessing the structural integrity of the light poles. And so what it would do is it's going to inform us as to whether or not we'll need to change those out. That money that you saw in district-wide ties into obviously replacing the poles if necessary, but also the heads.
Got it. And the playground replacement, that's the rocket ship,
It's the rocket ship in the tot area.
and those that, they've long past their useful life?
Yes, I mean, this is something, was part of Greenprint looking at redeveloping that whole park. But staff feel that that these are definitely in need. We think 2020 is a good year for it as well, but we definitely want to update both of those playgrounds.
Got it.
And then we can move on to West Ridge, little there, and then Woodridge Park, and that's the park that I had mentioned, where you see here tennis court patch, color, and restripe. When we do that next year, the plan at this point is most likely to convert those to the pickleball courts.
So backing up to West Ridge, where you had a $200,000 budget for 2018 for athletic lights replacement. That's been deferred now? Is that what-
No, so what you don't see here, because it was in an operation budget, was we did an assessment of the light poles out here, because we had some concerns about them, and so we then put in funds in case we had to have a quicker replacement of those poles, but the study was positive, and we didn't need to replace them. Therefore, we didn't expend the
So you
funds.
deferred that?
Yeah, so yeah,
Okay.
say that. All right, then if you flip the page, we're going to go into facilities and start with Centennial Ice Arena. So what you'll notice for Centennial is 2020 is really heavy. The idea there is, as you know, we're looking at doing some improvements to the lobby area there. There are a number of other items that need to be done there, and it makes the most sense to couple those with that larger project. And that would include items like the first one here, the water heater replacement, mechanical duct room ceiling. Now, if you go down to the third to the last item, you'll notice it's a pretty high-ticket item there, and that's 1.5 million, and that's for the compressor replacement, and that's it's unfortunately, the coolant that's used in R22 is being phased out, and so we simply have to replace that. And that was in last year's capital. It was in a later year, and it was a lower dollar amount, but staff have done more research about it now and gotten a much better understanding, and so that's where we think we might be for it. And the idea here would be to couple that work at the same time, doing the improvements at Centennial.
Jeff, I'm sorry.
Can that work be done over the summer? I mean, are we going to, does that impact the season, the ice skating season, or is the replacement of the compressor?
You know, that's an excellent question that I can't really answer at this point.
Jeff, I'm going to interrupt for a second, and I think at Centennial, to call the attention to the last page where there might have been a question about lobby enhancements, and that's appearing now in the budget under green print at 2020. So it'll be a big year for Centennial.
By the way, it's not just lobby, it's also improving the gymnastics facility and improving the parking lot also.
Right, I just didn't read the whole
So,
thing.
yeah, so, but it's not, I don't want people to think that we're spending a lot of money just replacing a lobby.
Right, you're correct. Basically, it's not the ice, it's the rest of the building.
Yeah, exactly.
So then we'll move on to Deer Creek Courts. We have some kind of routine maintenance scheduled there. We also are scheduling a roof replacement in 2020. And then in 2020 also, we've put some funds for planning for the conversion of the racquetball courts there, and then we'd anticipate doing that work in 2021.
What are we planning to do with them?
Well, we'll find out in 2020 when we plan.
Okay.
What's your usage for racquetball?
Rob?
Very low, maybe 10%, or less, 5%
Yeah.
of those courts are used. Of the overall court availability throughout the day, 5 to 10%. In fact, a lot of it is just overflow tennis, teaching the Kiwis and things like that.
Really?
Would we still do golf in one of the racquetball courts?
No.
That flooded out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Never mind.
All right, then we'll move on to the Golf Learning Center. So you'll see there were a number of projects that were done to make improvements there this year. We had the pump replacement, lighting repair, and also replacing the hitting station mats. And then we've got a few items out in 2021, one being the sign replacement. That's a 50% cost share with the city on the sign replacement. And also the mini golf carpet replacement and the canopy. That's at the range, the canopy.
Carpet.
All right, and then next for Heller Nature Center, we did a number of improvements this year, and in lieu of originally doing the climbing wall, we actually put in crate stacking, and so that was completed this year. You'll see that in the 2018, and some other improvements on the team's course, including some ADA improvements for accessibility. And then for next year, we have in there funds to do an update to the lobby exhibit, and also some repairs to our compound gate. And then in 2021, we have some equipment replacements. Hidden Creek Aqua Park, I'll give you an opportunity. I know there's a number of items on here to take a look at it, and then I'll happy to answer any questions.
Why don't you start with explaining the filter sand replacement for 2019?
So the filter sand replacement is really the filtering system for the pool. It's now over 20 years old, and we have been inspecting it on an annual basis, and it's close to the end of its useful life. So about every 8 years, we would be swapping the sand out, and when we looked at it this year, the whole system is in need of replacement. So it would be scheduled for fall of next year, so we get to
And the next question I have is regarding the splash pad pump for 2021. Didn't we just redo the splash pad?
Not the pump.
So, we did. This is the pump itself that's on a typical replacement schedule. So this would be a 5 to 6 year replacement schedule. If not needed, we would push it back a little, but we usually put the pumps on a 5 to 6 year replacement schedule.
And how often do you inspect the pumps?
All the time. Yeah, I mean, before we open and we close. So there's a couple of pumps right now that are on a rebuild for next year, and they're on the scheduled plan, so they're about a 5 to 6 year rebuild.
So Mitch, all these items for Hidden Creek, they're pretty much scheduled maintenance.
Yeah.
Body sliding surface.
Any other questions on Hidden Creek? All right, so the next item, Highland Park Country Club. The first one here, the Facility Maintenance Fund, this was the money we put in each year for kind of the unanticipated repairs that need to be done in the building. And you'll see those are not continued into 2019 and beyond because we're going to no longer be operating that facility. However, we still do have some expenses. The next one here, which is in the process of kind of being discussed with the city, is a share of the anticipated roof replacement for the country club building. And then the next one here, the asphalt allowance, and this is what we spoke about at the beginning of my presentation, was we have $160,000 here for path work that we're anticipating. And exactly what that's going to look like at this point, we're not sure. That's going to come out of our country club planning. And then last, with the agreements with the city, we have parking lot and asphalt replacements that the Park District will be covering a 50% share of, and that's scheduled out for 2022.
And isn't that tied to their movement of the seniors to the revised senior center?
Yes,
That's a contractual obligation
that is.
we have under the new agreements. Okay. Okay, Park Avenue Beach.
Park Avenue Beach, we had monies in there we had just as general improvements. At this point, those funds have been utilized for the planning process we've been going through and we'll be discussing tonight in regards to repair or replacement of the barge breakwater. And the next item down is engineering services, and this would be funds that we would anticipate spending if we were to move forward with one of the options. And then lastly, we've put in funds here for garage storage. As we know, we are going through the Lakefront Master Plan update. In all of our lakefront parks, there may be recommended updates we'll look at. But right now, outside of that, it's very clear to staff that there are some needs for improvement in the garage and storage. So that's what those dollars have been budgeted for.
And that's the garage directly south from the yacht club?
The next one here, the Parks Operations Center. This is just the district-wide waste and recycling containers that we're replacing in our parks. That's what those funds are for. And the second one here, this is an addition. This is the Salt Dome. In 2020, we've got word from the city now that we might be moving forward with this, so this would be our shared cost on this.
Where is that going to go? Is it in the building?
So the salt dome that's over next to Public Works in 22.
Oh, but we're going to be,
Yeah, we
it's
saw-
under POGO, but okay.
Yeah, we store
Yeah,
our
it's just
salt
under
there.
parks.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
store our salt there. with the city.
John, I think, Cal, that you made a good point, Terry. We actually use and share the facility to store the salt.
Then the next facility up is the Recreation Center of Highland Park. Here we have our regular equipment upgrade and replacements. A few other items. Let's see. And then we have, and you'll see in 2019, a little further down, we have funds for the locker room renovation planning, and then our plan is to follow up the renovations in the locker room in 2020. All right, and then the next facility down is the Rosewood Interpretive Center. We just have kind of a placeholder of funds there in 2022 for any potential needs, seeing that this is a very new facility. And then that brings us to Sunset Valley Golf Club. The first item here is our lease for our mowers and also our golf cart lease. You'll see here, I want to point this out, the asphalt allowance, you'll see the number that's budgeted and the number that was expended are quite different. But as we go through all of the asphalt that we may have seen, we have an overall budget for it. Like I said, we bring it down in each facility. We actually came in under budget for the total funds, but as we progress through the year, we kind of shift around a little bit where we were planning on doing some of this work. And so that's what happened here, where we ended up moving some funds to this area, but if you were to add up all the asphalt dollars, we actually come in under budget. And then the rest of the items here for Sunset Valley in the future years are equipment replacement.
The actual maintenance for Sunset Valley, that's in the budget for Sunset Valley. It's not in the capital improvement.
Yeah, so the idea is the capital is typically going to be items that are $10,000 or more and aren't operational.
Here's the biggie.
All right, West Ridge Center. So you'll see here the first line item we have that we've had for several years is the facility maintenance fund. We know that there's a lot of needs in this facility, so these are dollars that have been allocated for kind of the unexpected items that are musts. And what we are looking at is more long-term with this building, and so if you go down a little bit, we've got facility improvement master planning for next year, and what we'd like to do is bring in a group to work with us to do some some long-term planning here. And then the following 4 years, you'll see over those 4 years, we are implementing, so $250,000 each year, the 250,000, to implement some of those changes and improvements. And generally, at this point, what we're talking about is going to be things like electrical, plumbing, things that are significant needs that need to be upgraded in this building. All right, well, believe it or not, we made it to the end. And so the only other section here is the Green Print 2024 projects.
Let's back up before we get to green print. Can you just total these out? Because I know, unless Annette's going to talk about that. Are you going to talk about what we talked about the Finance Committee regarding what our projection, what we want to spend on an annual basis on capital improvements? No, because I know that you were part of the presentation. Is there a separate presentation about how we're paying for this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I will address it when
Okay.
it's finished.
Okay, just want to make sure. Okay.
Yeah. So actually, you know what might make the most sense then? I'm going to skip past the green print items, and I'm going to go down to the list here, and I'll let Annette cover the green print items. And this is, I had referenced earlier, this is the additional unbudgeted items. So there's kind of a number of things here. There are almost like wish list items. There's also some things that we do anticipate adding, like one of the items is lakefront master plan update improvements. Once we're completed that process, there'll be some recommendations that come out of that. We would use those recommendations to potentially make some additions to the capital plan in the future. So I can just briefly go through this list if there's any questions. The first one here is the barge replacement repair, which we're going to be talking about momentarily. The next is through the agreements, there's shared cost for the rec center and the country club building. And so we've yet to have exactly what those estimates are. Green Print 2024 Track 1 Sunset Woods. This is kind of what I had alluded to earlier, where we now have the dollars in there to replace the playground, but it doesn't go beyond that. We're not talking about master planning that area or the park as a whole, which was something we originally had in Track 1 of Green Print. Deer Creek Courts, this was a piece of equipment that they were hoping to obtain, but we put it down here because we did not include it in the plan. Hidden Creek Aqua Park kitchen improvements. The Lakefront Master Plan update I touched on already. Then there has been plans for Millard and opening up the ravine and stabilization there. Maroney Park redevelopment, as what I had mentioned earlier. Right now, the plan reflects just a playground replacement, but staff would see it would be ideal to do a larger kind of redevelopment of that park, which obviously would cost more. It would be maybe looking at moving that playground to an area in the park that makes a little more sense. Park gate replacements. We've changed some of the gates down at the beach. If this is something we want to move forward with, it's not funded right now, but that's in there. Also, over at Pogo, the park barn, the pole barn painting and repairs. It's the building just adjacent to Pogo that was used for golf maintenance. We kept that building because we need the storage space. And there have been discussions about going in and kind of cleaning it up, doing some repairs and some painting. However, we got quotes for that, significant in cost, so we decided to not include it in the plan, so it's down here. The recreation center, blind replacement in the future, also track resurfacing, which will be coming up relatively soon on the plan. Rosewood Pond restoration, that's referring to in the upper Rosewood Park, the Jensen Pond up there. We have plans for renovations of that. It's a significant cost as well, so it's not something that staff has recommended at this point. And then the Sunset Valley Golf Club short game area, this is where the old Parks Garage stood, just on the end of the parking lot. And this is something where there's been talk about doing something out there, but obviously it's not funded at this time. Synthetic field groomer and equipment. This would be something that we would need to purchase if we were to move to a synthetic field anywhere. And then lastly, West Ridge Jam and Jungle improvements. The Jam and Jungle down the hall is certainly in need of a renovation, so something else that staff has identified. And that is it. Annette, do you want to come over and talk about your portion?
In addition to reviewing the five-year capital, the Finance Committee also takes the opportunity, and we do this 2 or 3 times throughout the year, to review the capital fund analysis, is what I like to refer to it as. Our common name for it is kind of our funding model. So during that process, we are evaluating all the inputs into the fund, all the dollars that are coming in, and then looking at the uses of those dollars. The five-year capital is just so at the end of every year, the goal is that that fund balance would be 25% of the next year's expenditures. That's a way to ensure that we always have enough money to pay our bills, basically. The capital fund is not that, and it's something that has kind of made me a little nervous, quite frankly, so I brought it to the attention of the Finance Committee, and we were discussing what that fund balance should be. So we would like to address the policy and target it so at the end of every year, we are at least $1.5 million remaining in the capital fund, so that if something completely unexpected happens, we have the means to address that.
And give us an example of something happening that we didn't anticipate. The bridge?
Really, yeah. It's the bridge, and then it was also, I'm going to say Kennedy Park, too, because the community, we underestimated the community's passion for that park, and so we addressed it accordingly.
So just to expand on that, we talked about, again, Barney was in the conversation also because we was at the Finance Committee meeting, is that all our other funds have a fund balance policy. Our capital funds does not. And we were thinking that there'd be a recommendation to the board that as we move forward with approving a capital plan, that we also talk about amending our fund balance policy so that we agree on some type of base number that should always be in our capital budget, our capital fund in case of an emergency, like a bridge failing or something like that, that needs to be immediately addressed. So that's something that we're going to bring to you later, but that was, we talked about that at the Finance Committee. The other thing that we talked about at the Finance Committee was that, and this was like a
About $4 million. And I do round up because I am very conservative. So it's about $4 million every year that is spent on just replacement capital, so maintaining what we have. And so in the capital analysis or that funding model, that's the PEG, that's the number that I'm plugging in for the 5-year capital. That goes beyond 2024.
Anything else?
Well, I just wanted to make, we use the term fund balance, and I think other people would call it a reserve. So we're always trying to maintain a reserve of available cash, so that if something comes up, we have the money basically available.
Correct.
Bless you. Bless you.
Oh,
All right, guys, thank you both.
Thank you.
Jeff, did you have fun with your first budget presentation?
I'm sorry?
Did you enjoy your first budget presentation?
Great.
All right, you're still up. Park Avenue.
All right, thank you very much. So as the board would recall, we went out for a request for qualifications to hire a firm to assess the status of the Park Avenue barge and also develop several replacement or repair strategies. So the Park District hired Smith Group for that work. They've gone through the process and now coming back to the board with their report, and they're going to go through the different options that have been developed and make a recommendation on repair or replacement of the barge. And with that said, I'm going to introduce Margaret Bochek.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Margaret Bochek. I am a coastal engineer with Smith Group. I brought with me Rob Wright. He's a senior civil engineer and long, extensive history of construction engineering, so he can answer questions regarding that. So, moving forward, this is the project team. The two gentlemen on the right side of the screen, I did not bother bringing down with me, but they've been an integral part of all of this. And if you have questions that neither of us can answer, we will go back to the team and get back to you. So this is the barge initial construction back in the early 1980s. They purchased a barge of unknown age at that time to sink in this location with some retrofitting. And at that time, you can see here that they filled it with some random dredgings and fill at that time, propped it up and put in some scour stone on the outside. So these are the things that are beneath that concrete surface that you might not have seen, but that's what was hidden inside. So we started by doing a site inspection. You all know what it now looks like. We walked around the outside, stationed it off, and looked for any cracks or any areas that could have led to the overall failure that you see today. So we noticed, first off, that there was a good amount of fatigue failure cracking. This is just the constant movement of anything in the water. With energy passing it, it wears it down, and eventually you're going to end up with cracks in the steel hull of the barge itself. So from that, we noticed that there was a loss of the fill material. As I mentioned, it was filled with what was called dredgings and fill material, which is generally sand. And sand, of course, as you know, is very small particles and tend to leak through any of those failure cracks that formed over time of just being in the water. So once that happened, it created a void underneath that concrete slab that is sitting on top of those wire ropes that were holding the whole system together. Those wire ropes were not intended to be pushed down on by the weight of the concrete. So over time, with the addition of ice, around the system to look for failures lower down. Now, he could only, of course, visually search to the mudline, and a good amount of the seal was covered in zebra mussels, so he wasn't able to assess if there was additional failure cracking toward the mudline. But we can imagine that what we're seeing above water is also what we would see below water. So, oh, and with that also, the riprap that was placed in front of the barge was scattered throughout. Now, when waves hit a vertical surface, they reject the energy in the opposite direction, and that actually picked up these rocks that were very large in size, about 3 feet across, and moved them away from the system. So over the time that this has been there since the 80s, you can imagine it's been hit with a number of very large storms. So what we do at the beginning of any water analysis is do what we call a mid-ocean analysis, and that's looking at wind, waves, ice, currents, and this is just an assessment of the site. So from this, we can see that the winds are all over the place, but generally they are coming out of the southwest. Contrary to that, most of your waves, or at least your larger waves, are coming from the north-northeast. How they impact your site, though, they do tend to turn around and impact your site at a perpendicular angle. This becomes important later on. So this also shows that your significant waves don't happen in the summer. You probably notice that things are rather calm in the summer and get a bit more agitated in the spring and fall seasons. This is normal for Lake Michigan. I also want to point out that the water levels here, for an extreme water level with surge of course is a bit of extra water that gets pushed up on shore due to pressure systems or wind systems. The height of the extreme water level plus surge is actually over the top of the existing barge, which is at 584 IGLD, which means that the water would actually flow past it. So this is just an extreme case, but it is something to note when looking at replacements or repairs. So we also hired a company to take 2 borings of the site. This becomes important for replacement or an installation of anything new in the area to know how far we need to drive, say, a sheet pile, or what's going to happen over time for a new barge and how it's going to settle into place. We took 2 borings near the system, which I'm very impressed by this image. I'm not sure where they got it, but it happened to be during a stormy day, and there you can see that overtopping that I was just talking about. And the borings actually show that you have a good amount of sand, silt, and clay, but in general, it's pretty good conditions, and you won't have a problem with driving sheet pile in. Oh, if there are any questions, just feel free to stop me. Otherwise, I'll just keep going. We're good? Okay. So that took us into the concept designs. We were asked to look at repair and replacement strategies to give you the best bang for your buck and how to get this back up and operational for a good amount of time, which we'll get into. But of course, the first thing is, what happens if we do nothing? Well, fortunately for you, there is this inner wall of the cargo box. We call the barge a cargo box, that is still structurally sound. While it does have some wires hanging from it, it does not appear to be in imminent threat of any kind of danger or fatigue failure. And even if it were, if it were to fall down, say, in the winter, which is a low likelihood in the short term, that wave energy would pass through and hit this interior sheet pile wall, which would prevent it from moving any further and would not then therefore change the shape of your beach. Your beach on the lee side of the barge is actually formed based on this diffraction point. Diffraction is where a wave actually starts to bend around an object, and that's all the way at the end of the barge. The barge itself, or the end of the barge, is in no danger or failure of moving or changing, so your beach should remain stable. Your beach is actually more impacted by water levels than it is by the waves coming around the edge of the barge. So you could probably notice with your higher water levels, it looks like it has receded or flattened, and that's just because of high water and how far the waves can reach. So concept 1 was leaving the barge in place. What could we do? Well, we talked about encapsulating the barge, which includes just cutting down a portion of the top, placing sheet pile along 3 sides, and tying that together with tie rods, just refilling the inside with rubble or fill, not sand, and then placing a concrete surface on top of that. That is basically going to give you back exactly what you had, with a sheet pile on the sides and a little bit wider to accommodate the encapsulation of the barge that you have. Now, the construction for doing that takes about 8 to 10 weeks, weather dependent, of course, and also the type of contractor that you hire. Permitting can be about 6 to 8 months. Sheet pile is the preferred option of the permitters in this area due to its low impact on the ground. Years. So the service life of this, even though it's just encapsulating the old dilapidated barge, is about 70 years, 65 to 70 years. The second concept we looked at was replacing the barge with another barge. This was common at one point in time. You don't see this so much anymore, but it's a great reuse of something that is otherwise no longer used for its primary purpose, which was, of course, to transfer materials. So we looked at different hopper barges that were in the area. Many of them are down in Louisiana or on the Mississippi River. So we included the cost to get that up here, retrofit it, and put in essentially a similar but enhanced system to what you already had. And looking at barges that were about the same size, we came up with a probable cost of doing this of about $1.3 million. Now, permitting is going to be a little bit longer. Permitters want to know that whatever we're putting into this area does not contain any type of chemicals or negative effects to the water. So the permitting process is guaranteed to be a little longer on this one. And of course, the retrofitting itself before it even gets placed is going to take a couple weeks. Therefore, the construction's a bit longer at 12 to 14 weeks. And barges are not, they don't live forever. As you know, have one now, but it gave you almost 40 years of service life. Now, if we estimate that the barge had been about 10 years old, although we don't know that for sure at the time it came in, we're estimating you get about 50 years out of a barge, out of a new barge. Now, all of the barges that we can purchase, of course, are not brand new. So of the ones that we could find that were of reasonable price, the remaining service life for them is about 28 to 34 years, and that's what we would be comfortable saying for the service life of this option.
How do you remove the existing barge?
It would have to be removed in pieces. You would have to remove all of the concrete out, tear down the walls, and dig out the foundation if anything was left.
Is that all the way via the lake, or is it around here?
That's a good question. Do you know?
Well, it could be either way. Looking at your site and how that actually sits, it'd be very difficult to remove some of these items on the land base. They would probably have to be barge-based constructions for some of this. We're hoping on some of the options that we'd actually be doing land-based construction, but if we remove that barge, we would assume that the contractor would probably be pulling that out with a barge-based crane in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Now, some of it can be recycled since it is steel, but the rest would have to be landfilled.
Margaret,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask the audience to hold questions till the end.
Oh, okay.
No.
Nope. That sounds
So
good.
let's go through the whole presentation, and we have all night to ask everything we want.
Yeah, we're here all night, so.
Tip your waiters off.
So the third concept is a cellular sheet pile. Now this, again, includes removing the existing barge in its entirety and then driving sheet pile in a rectangular structure all the way out to accommodate the same length, which is 195 feet of your current barge, putting in some tie rod assembly to hold it all together, filling it again with rock fill, and putting a concrete surface across the top. This is a brand-new construction. Now, the minimum size that we would recommend is 8 feet across, but you can go as wide as you want. Every additional foot, of course, does cost extra because it's extra steel, fill, and concrete, but that can be discussed later. In this image, we did include riprap along the front of face of the structure. Now, this is not a required feature, but it does reduce the agitation in front and behind the sheet pile structure, which gives you less downtime for the ramp itself. Downtime, of course, the times you cannot use it because the agitation is too high. So this type of construction will take about 12 to 14 weeks. It's a little bit on the longer side because it does include 4 weeks of barge removal. The permitting is only 6 to 8 months. I say only, but that's actually reasonably good for permitting in Illinois, which can be a little difficult at times. The opinion and probable cost is about $1.4 million. Now, that is with the riprap in front. If you were to remove that, you can remove a little over $100,000 from that estimate. And the service life, again, because it is sheet pile, gives you about 65 to 70 years of service life before you have to think about replacing it. Now, of course, with proper maintenance, that can be exceeded, but that's about the average. So the last concept we looked at was filling your current cargo box with rubble. Now, what this does is, of course, it holds the whole system in place, and it prevents a good amount of wave energy from hitting the backside of the cargo wall. As I kind of explained earlier, the failure mechanism for the remaining structure is that lee side wall to collapse. And to prevent this, we want to reduce the wave energy going through and hitting that wall. The best option for doing this is to fill the current system with rubble. Now, we had our graphics person kind of give you an idea of what that would look like, and that's really just a good amount of rubble just placed inside the box itself. Now, we can extend the service life even further by placing some bracing against that lee side wall inside the boat ramp area. So in this image up here, you can see that we've placed some H piles with a cap across the top, which this is a very simple idea of what that looks like. It's just bracing along the backside. It is not a walkway. It's only about 18 inches wide, but that will further brace that back wall and hold it into service for a longer amount of time. Now, that's all based on statistics, and there's a lot of unknowns and risk involved with reusing the system because we don't know the condition of the steel below the mud line and how far along it actually is. But with this option, we feel it's safe to say you'll have about 20 years, maybe even more, of service life. Yeah, that's kind of that. Construction, sorry. Construction will take about 6 to 9 weeks. It could be land or water-based. If it is land-based, that surface, which is shown at 6 feet, will likely have to become wider so that the land-based equipment can actually roll across the top of it. And the permitting is only about 3 to 4 months. Now, talking to the permitting agencies about this, they do consider this to be more of a repair than a replacement, and therefore the permitting requirements are much more straightforward and a bit easier to get through. Now, the probable cost on this, with the steel, with the rubble, and the construction itself, would be a little over $500,000. And this service life, like I said, we're estimating to be around 20 years.
And really, that 20 years is with yearly maintenance associated with this.
Yes.
Having a rubble mound structure like this that's not necessarily sized for very extreme events will have maintenance associated with that, right?
Right.
So the rocks will move in very large events because really we're trying to cut down the amount of energy that is hitting that back wall to prevent fatigue of the existing structure.
Right. Rocks will, until they find their happy place, as I like to call it, you will see them moving around and shaking down and grabbing onto one another. So for the first few years are the most critical. If we were to receive a storm within the first few years, you would likely see a bit more scattering. And based on the amount of scatter, we would recommend then repair, and that is replacement with additional rock or picking it up off of the lake bed and moving it back into place. So there is an ongoing maintenance associated with an option like this that would be reduced to minimal in the other options. So permitting I touched on very briefly. You will require a permit for all of these options. Anything you put in the water is going to initiate a permit through the Army Corps of Engineers, Illinois EPA, and the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. Now, it's kind of a trickle-down effect. The EPA is the kind of the head of the tree. They have to approve it. They're looking for water quality. They're looking for any contaminants in the soil are not being disturbed, which is why we want to go for more of a sheet pile option versus something that would require a bit of dredging. And once they say yes, it goes to Illinois DNR. They look at it. Once they say yes, it goes to the Army Engineers. So it's this trickle-down effect that you need all of those to sign off on the design, which is why permitting can sometimes take a long time. There are other, of course, permits that you might need to get. They are a bit more straightforward and in our experience have not taken more than a couple months. And they would be well below the timeline of the big regulatory agencies. So just in summary, of course you can choose to do nothing, which I've kind of outlaid the eventual failure of that inside wall and what that would do to the site. Or you can go with one of these options, the repair strategy, the replacement, the sheet pile, cellular structure, or the rubble fill. And those are just those numbers that I placed out. And that is the end of my presentation if you have questions.
Okay, we're going to start, the commissioners will ask questions and the public will have their
Okay.
ask questions. Just go down the line, all
Yeah,
right?
so thank you for that.
Can we leave the summary up?
Yes, I'll leave it.
Okay.
Well, actually, can you go to the fourth concept?
Sure.
Would that rubble be exposed like that?
Yes, it would.
Okay. 'Cause
Yes.
I would imagine that would cause, like you said, maintenance, but I have a safety concern about that, of people climbing. We get that at Rosewood.
Right.
Makes me kind of uneasy. Okay, so thank you.
Right. I would imagine that this would be what we like to call an attractive nuisance, as it would be above the water line. It's not something that's comfortable to walk on. It is not a structure that's meant to be walked on. So likely you would need to keep some type of fencing or jersey barrier in place to prevent the public from walking out on it.
Lori, any more?
That's it. That was my only-
Barney?
I'd like to reserve my questions.
Okay. Gary? About the rocks.
Yes.
There's no possible way to put some sort of heavy-duty netting or anything like that across the top that would keep the rocks in place? And it may also discourage people from climbing on it?
In our experience, there is netted or caged rocks like gabions that have been used in coastal systems in the past. Those tend to break and wear down over a shorter period of time. We are talking about larger rocks. In fact, we're talking about 2.5 to 3 foot rocks for like a 50-year return period storm event, and even larger if we wanted to size it that way. Putting those within netting or encasements, I think that would be more of a maintenance issue as it started to break free,
So you think that
rather
would
than
be
not.
more expensive than?
No, I
if you
think
had
it'd be
it-
more of a headache, is what I
Not-
think.
Okay, so not in terms of expense. Because I'm picturing, we have, we've talked about this a lot with a lot of our facilities and a lot of our parks,
Mm-hmm.
is that we seem to be having 10-year storms every year, 100-year storms every 5 years and whatever.
Right.
And you're saying that you may have to come out, especially until they find their happy place,
Right.
to come and replace those rocks back on. And so, in your experience, you would recommend, if we went with this option, that we would leave them loose like that over putting something that might protect it?
Well, I don't necessarily know that we could actually size a net or some other structure to protect the rock. The whole idea of the rock is that is the protection. So it's
Right.
kind of like putting a helmet on a helmet, right?
I don't know of any place that I've ever seen a breakwater or a structure like this have a secondary containment system, just how these things shift. Also, I'm not so sure how that would react in our icing situation
Right.
that we have at this location. We're looking at about 30 inches of ice, worst case scenario.
Worst case scenario, yes.
So that's a 24-foot piece, about each one, yeah. So we can have some very large pieces of ice in that situation. And really in the winter, it's the ice shelf that causes as much movement of the rocks as it does for those storm events during the summer.
It can, yes. So if we oversize the rock and we go even larger on the rock, those have a greater likelihood of remaining in place during a very strong event than trying to net them or pin them down in any type of fashion.
And have you discussed with staff about what a typical maintenance cost might be?
Maintenance costs, just the mobilization of getting someone down to your site is going to be on the order of 10,000, maybe more, just to get someone here. And then there's the materials, the labor, and so on and so forth. So that starts to add up, which means if the damage wasn't significant enough, it's best to leave it. And as the damage starts to increase, then you can do one big maintenance push. It depends on the amount of damage, but it could be anywhere from $15,000 to $50,000.
That's all for now.
I hear you. Let's go back.
Sure.
Lori?
Sorry, it occurred to me, can you go back to the last slide with the permit review? Okay, so, I see the quickest anything could get done is 6 weeks, the longest 14. When would be the optimal time to start any of these projects? And, would that impede the boaters from using Park Avenue? Would we have to close it, or what would be the ramifications of any project at Park Avenue?
Due to your site and how it is accessed, I would say that yes, the boat launch would need to be closed during construction, and therefore any type of construction like this is typically done early spring before Memorial Day or after Labor Day. Those are the best times to actually get construction done within Lake Michigan to avoid the peak season of boaters. Of course, we can't start construction until we have the permits. We can hire someone, but they cannot physically get to the site and start laying things down until permits are in place.
Thank you, Brian.
I got a quick question. I want to dovetail on something Terry had asked you. When you asked you about protective netting or something covering the rocks, why can't you put a floor over that? Is it because the sides will move with the waves?
I'm sorry, a floor?
Like a flooring, a covering over it. So it's not exposed rock, it's exposed sheet metal.
Well, wave energy will enter into the rocks through any type of holes. And we see this problem a lot with walkways on top of rocks that you have uplift. So any type of wave energy that's going to get into the rocks
We'll move
will move it.
Okay.
So if you have some type of system over it that doesn't allow for that pressure release, netting would be okay. If it was a covering or a flooring, it would lift that up.
All right. Thank you. Cal?
You're welcome.
I'm piggybacking on Lori's question regarding when would you do the work.
Yes.
So let's say, for example, one of these is 6 to 8 months, and you start, one of these options, and you start after Labor Day. Can you do the construction work late into the fall and into the winter, or is that, or you stop and you wait till the spring? How does that work?
Typically, yes, until there's a point where ice and weather has to shut it down because you can no longer either install the items or with rock. I know we discussed previously, rock needs to be mined from the quarry before the temperature is below a certain amount. That will usually hang up a construction, but many of these items can actually be placed in ice if the ice is not too thick, so winter construction still is a possibility. I know Rob probably has better experience with that.
Right, so, I build a lot of structures up on Lake Superior, and we'll build right into December up there, and into the ice, either cellular sheet pile or breakwater type construction. In something like this, you'd expect them to get a barge on there as they're gonna do it in the spring, they mobilize a barge, right at ice breakup to come over there to start the work of destruction or demolition of the existing barge in either of the instances. So, you know, seeing that they get, what do we have breakup, mid-March?
Late March.
Late March, so they would have to begin right then and there to do it. In the fall, we're working on a project just south of here that's just started after Memorial Day or after Labor Day. I'm starting a breakwater up north in a week that has to be done by the end of the year. So the contractors can jump on this and they'll work really until it gets to be pretty nasty out there in those instances.
Right, because as I also pointed out, the winter storms, or I should say the spring and winter storms, are what's going to impede work the most.
Okay. With regard to each one of these concepts, I'm going to call them concepts, is annual dredging required with any of them or all of them?
Well, dredging, of course, for your site is based on your launch and what vessels are getting, using the launch. None of these require dredging for installation, and none of them will change your current dredge schedule.
So we'll still have the same dredging expense that we have annually with any of these options?
You will. Now, the design can be, if you were to move forward with a new design, we can look at lengthening or changing the orientation into like hooks or curves to reduce the amount of dredging that you have in the long term. But if we were to replace the system exactly as it is today with 195 feet out, your dredging would remain the same.
And then any of these options, maybe this is a question for our staff, do any of these options have a negative or positive or neutral impact on our annual budget for Park Avenue? What we spend down there for maintenance, do any of these have impact any of our annual budget in any way?
Well, as mentioned with the fourth concept, the rubble fill, there is the anticipation that there will be maintenance. It's anticipated to be greater than the others. The challenge is that it's an unknown.
So right now, except for concept number 4, none of these other concepts will anyway impact what our annual maintenance, what our annual budget for Park Avenue.
I mean, it certainly would have an impact on operations. The park staff may be setting up and stuff each year, but we don't anticipate any additional costs.
So no material difference. Okay.
On the barge concept.
Excuse me, I'm asking a question. Okay.
No, if
So-
you're asking about maintenance.
Okay.
then on the barge,
David, let me finish answering my question, and we'll turn it over to the public. Last question, and then we could turn it over to David, which is probably a better question than I'm about to ask. But how much is the tariffs impacting these prices? So if there were no tariffs, what are we talking about? What were we talking about in numbers?
So I can speak a little bit. A year ago, if I were to put in a small sheet pile cell like this, I might be looking at about $28 to $29 a face foot for your steel cost with sheet pile, and that'd be driven. We'd be looking at about $1,600 a ton for the steel. Currently, I'm at about anywhere from $35 to $45 a face foot to have that driven, which is about $2,600 to $2,800 a ton driven for the steel. So it's had a substantial increase in the price.
So help me with my
we're
math,
looking
okay?
We're looking at about a 50%
50 to
increase
60%.
from how it was about a year ago.
Yeah.
So what does that do to these prices?
These prices reflect what we've been looking at for the current one.
So if there were no tariffs, let's say concept number 3, what would we be looking at if there was no tariffs? Ballpark. I'm not going to hold you to it, but just ballpark.
Well, there was the cost breakdowns in the back of the report that we
Yeah.
gave, and there is a number there for steel.
And that's what I'd have to look at really quick
Yes.
to knock that steel price in half. Because our labor price really doesn't change on any option. It's really just the cost of our steel.
So why don't I hand you this, okay, and then you can take a look at this, and then David can ask his better question than mine, and then, okay, my question really comes to what I'm thinking about is if there was no tariffs,
Right.
if, let's say we put this, because right now, there's no imminent threat, is what you said, to destruction. If we postpone this for a year or two, what would that do, let's say, on the IFCOM that the tariffs aren't there, how would that impact the price?
Well, I don't know what the current tariffs will do, but assuming that they went back to pre-tariff
Yes.
costs, as Rob was saying, that they would reduce by about 25 to 50%.
We're looking at about $150,000 in steel cost difference.
Right,
Okay, got it. Thank you.
due to the tariffs.
Before we
So
go
it's-
on,
So it's costing another $150,000 because of the tariffs.
Yes.
before we go on, are you done?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to just make some observations, more so than asking some questions. I think that we're at a situation with the barge and the boat launch ramp that will probably be able to operate through next season. Am I speaking loud enough? All right. Well, all right, I think we can operate successfully through next season. But that means we have to make a commitment for the season after that. And as I'd love there not to be tariffs, I don't want to take that into consideration as one of the factors here. But hopefully by 2020, when we actually do the work, maybe the tariffs will be gone. From my observations of the use of the facility, from my observation of the plans that are proposed, I'm looking at cellular sheet pile option number, which is option number 3, and even though it's significantly higher than the rubble fill, we would do a premier project in keeping with what I think has become the standard for the Park District. The 20-year option is wonderful from the pricing, but we're going to have maintenance costs which we can't anticipate. We're going to have to revisit this and spend the money in 20, 25 years. I mean, there are obviously a lot of questions that people can ask, but I, again, would say without any reservation, other than the money, I would do cellular sheet pile option number 3. And, you know, we can ask all kinds of questions about alternatives and covers and caps on the others, but 1 and 2 just don't seem to make any sense. And number 4 is a great number, but I don't think it is in keeping with the way we should do things at the Park District. So rather than asking questions, I decided at this point, I'm going to make my opinion known.
Okay, well, I'd like to hear from the public, see what they have to say. Are we on camera?
Wait,
Do we need them up there? Yeah. Do you have a mic?
David,
can I ask my question?
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, sure.
I mean, do I get a chance?
I thought you already asked your questions. You asked questions earlier.
Are we on camera?
Can we erase that part of the tape?
I'm just curious on all 4 concepts, what the anticipated yearly maintenance and repair costs, potential costs will be. And will there be a certainty of repair and maintenance costs on all 4 concepts that you provided to us tonight?
Right. What I can say is that options 1 through 3, because they have new structural steel being placed on the outside or with the barge itself, of those 3, the barge option would have the most maintenance because it is an unknown of how that barge is going to fare. Now, we do anticipate a 50-year cycle or a service life, but if something were to run into it, it has just as thin sheet pile, or I should say just as thin steel as your current barge. So of those 3, I would put that as the higher maintenance. The sheet pile, the new driven sheet pile, foregoing any large object impacting it, will perform perfectly well within waves and ice. It will be sized to do so. So the maintenance costs on those will be the lowest of those 3 options. Now, once we start talking about the rubble fill, the failure mechanism there is the remainder of the barge that is there. It's the lee side cargo box wall, which again, we do not know about the fatigue cracking and any issues below the water surface or below the mud line, below the zebra mussel line that we cannot see. which is why we are putting all these braces and additional riprap in there to reduce the energy on that wall, which was never intended to work as a cantilever wall, but does have some structural strength to it. As to actual dollars, as to how much it will cost,
Oh, I understand, we can't. Definitely.
yeah, that it's a little more hard to assess. Just anyone coming out. Sorry?
Depends what the damage is.
It depends what the damage is. If something large runs into it, then you will have to remove some sheet pile, drive new sheet pile. That has to be assessed with whatever the damage actually is.
Okay. Well, we have 8 people have signed up to speak. We will go in order. I will call a name. The speaker will take the microphone, state his or her name and address, and we'll normally limit it to 2 minutes. We will not do that tonight. And you can use that time to ask questions or make a comment. And we'll start with Bill Purley.
Yes, sir. My name is Bill Curley, and let me start off by saying that I'm kind of impressed with the thoroughness of what you've done. The only thing I would add is that this riprap in front of the, whatever it is that's going to be there, is this mic working?
Talking to it.
Doesn't sound like it.
Is it louder now?
Yes.
Okay. Is going to reduce the wave energy in the whole area. in
Yes.
front of the barge, and this is going to greatly enhance the boating safety. With regard to boating safety, safe practice dictates that sailboats depart in lee from the lee dock, so that the sails are not blown across the dock and the boat is not blown into the dock. And we haven't had that this year with the barge being fenced off and unsafe to access. I think at the very least, we need safe tie-up along the inside of the barge. And not far behind that, we need access to a catwalk or something else so that supplies can be brought onto the boats. Pilots can get out of the boat, go get their car, retrieve the trailer, take the boat.
Tie-ups. The option, the last option, which does have the H piles, there is the opportunity to attach a float along that, but that does project into the boat launch itself, which would then reduce the boat launch to 1 lane.
I would suggest that a fixed catwalk rather than a floating catwalk is going to be much more durable, less likely to be destroyed in a storm. I know that about 15, 20 years ago, when they took the floating catwalks in, and they were destroyed before the year was out. We came up here to sail at Highland Park that week because it was the only place to go in the water.
Right. Well, I will say that floating docks have definitely increased in popularity and durability in the past 10 years even. And my only concern about a fixed walk is that Lake Michigan has a 6-foot water level range. So when the water level is very low, if our catwalk is above that, it would be quite a climb to get down.
I'll just say that
voters, so just want to understand the last question. Is that, what you're proposing in concepts 1 through 3, is that a fixed dock?
No, I'm saying you can walk on top of the surface
Yeah.
of the structure that is
And
installed.
how does the water levels then impact having that stagnant walking surface?
Right, I think the gentleman was saying that an additional dock is placed in there that is affixed per year.
Yes, but you may recall that up until last year, there were a couple of ladders
Yeah.
on the side of the barge where you could get down to the
Yeah,
boats.
yeah, okay, got it. I understand, okay, thank you.
Okay, next is Maureen Hammond.
My name is Maureen Hammond, and I'm currently Commodore of the North Shore Yacht Club. Thank you all. Great presentation, very clear, great work. Our board has not had a chance to discuss the options since this was just released. But based on informal conversation with many of our members, I think I can speak for the majority of us and hope that you all will consider option number 3. It just, to do anything else just seems to be kicking the can down the road with future problems and issues. As we all know, we've all been through this before, but this boating facility, I mean, the breakwater is an essential part of keeping this facility functional. And this facility is a unique feature in Highland Park into the North Shore, and it's, we gotta keep it going. I think that, as Bill Curley mentioned, option number 3 would allow for either a fixed or floating separate dock. That would be a much safer option than what we have had in the past on that east side of the boat launch, where you have to rely on whatnot,
Right.
wall, all that. So there's a lot of positive aspects to this option number 3.
What's the expense with the fixed and floating dock? Are those in those numbers, or is that something in addition? Former Commodore.
And a few technical comments. Karen, when you talked about putting something over the rock, I can tell you an experience that I had when I had a 25-foot chain wrapped with a link onto the boulder at the end of the south end of the barge. Normally, why it was there, but it wasn't there in the spring. It was the ice that just ripped it completely off. So any netting that you had over those rocks, the ice would come through and just interfere it all, facing everything else. With regard to maintenance with the barge replacement, we got into this problem because we weren't doing the maintenance that needed to be done because we lost institutional knowledge. I talked about that the last time. The duty with the barge periodically will scale, but that may not solve the problem eventually. barges are meant to carry cargo, they're not meant to be breakwaters. Could you go to the overhead slide of the site for a moment? No. All right.
How's that one?
No, the one that shows the beach. You mentioned that we weren't getting that much erosion because of the barge. Actually, at the south end of the site, we are getting a tremendous amount of erosion. And what I would recommend, if possible, is doing option 3, but going out another 40 feet. If you go out another 40 feet, you will do a much better job of protecting that south end where we've lost a lot of sand because of storms and the high water. We've had a lot of erosion. Needless to say, Barney, I absolutely agree with you. In order to recover the functionality that we had before, I don't think at this point in the district's complete plan that we will look at a total redesign of that of the site. There are other options that would be nice to be looked at, but I think realistically, it's not going to happen for 20 or more years. And doing option 4, maintenance, you're guessing that's going to last 20 years. That's a guess on your part. Where you know if we, and if we're looking at 20 years, having to spend not $500,000 to, price that, in order to still have a pile of rocks with no place for people to sit and poor access to boating, it doesn't make sense to me. It's a foolish way to spend precious dollars. I think we should do it correctly, so at least we get the functionality.
What would that do? How would that
Yes.
impact the beach?
Okay, with a brand-new structure, we would look at preserving the beach for whatever size you were looking for. Now, as I mentioned, the high water is what's causing the erosion and not necessarily the damage to the barge itself. What happens there are waves actually pass by this, and you can see that they've curved in this picture, and that's what forms this curvature of this beach here. And it's based on the diffraction point where those waves start wrapping around at that point. Now, I'm sorry, David? As David pointed out, if you were to extend this out further, the diffraction point is further out, and that allows less energy and starts to fill out the beach. Now, the same thing can be said when the water level goes down. You're seeing erosion now, but when the water level goes down, that will fill back in. We happen to be near historic highs. We're only about a foot or even less than historic highs. So you're not the only village to be seeing this. There are many.
But it's the opportunity to do it because we know what will happen at high water.
Yes.
And we've had to move 2 racks of boats further north.
Yes.
Margaret, pushing that breakwater further to the south there,
Yes.
are we just pushing the wave energy and erosion problem just south of where it is now then?
Well, what we're doing is we're building out this beach a little bit further, but you will still see it reflect down to the base of that bluff just further down. So you would have to decide what area you wanted to protect. If that line ended at this point, we would make that the end of the reduced energy location. Now, there's modeling that can be done that if this is a new structure, that can actually look at different shapes of pulling out and pulling down, fish hooking, and that will modify the waves and the wave energy and the diffraction point to give you more beach where you want it to be.
Let me just ask a comment, because I reserve my time if you remember. One of the things that will be done, obviously, is looking at the modeling of the end of it. But we have to also be very careful about the impact on our neighbors to the south. And if we bring it out and we just move the point further south for erosion, then we're going to have objections. I just want everyone to be aware of that.
People to the south are getting the full brunt of the waves.
Right, and they will continue
They'll
to.
continue to get the full brunt.
We're just putting ourselves more into the shadow of the structure. We're
I
not
understand.
changing the environment further south.
We just have to be very careful and sensitive to that.
And how does that impact the permitting process if we did that?
We're going through a permitting process anyway, because we're putting things within the water. It does not extend the permit at all. Once we remove the existing structure, it's seen as a new structure going in, and we would still have to then show the footprint and the methodologies for doing that to get our permits.
What about the engineering? Would there be any additional engineering that would have to be done? Because we're actually not replacing the existing footprint, we're actually extending that. How would that impact that? And what would that do to the cost?
There would be the additional cost of the analysis running for the hydrodynamics and the wave modeling in that area to determine what was happening to that beach.
And what's a ballpark, what would that cost?
Usually a numerical modeling study is in the range of $40,000.
Okay. Peter Mordini?
Good morning, Jason, 53 Sheen Court. Again, you guys did a great job. And just wanted to add on with Cal, it's a good point, he's got the future, you might be saving money. Okay? And also another savings is the clubs you're talking about, the dredging, anything to make it less dredging, or slow down the dredging, slow down the process, if you have the dredging, great. So there's some cost savings there, of course. And if you do number 3, of course, you'll have more room inside the boat launch, obviously.
Right.
So that'll be safer, easier for boaters, of course. And we can probably go back to two-way traffic, which will be easier in case a storm comes, they have an out. So that's great. I'm just trying to make some good points here because this is exciting. And folks, like Annette said, the key word is continuing to have. I mean, we saw an example this summer how the fire department had to use that a few weeks straight on how important it was to some time actors. It's just a safety board and something that, is community really holds on. Like you said, the bank, there's other things I hear like $1.5 million for a cooler, it might last 15, 20 years, but you get 70 years out of it, it's the same amount of money. That's great.
Thank you. David Maltak?
Hi, David Maltak, 1111 Crofton Avenue North. Can you go back to the slide where you compare 1, 2, 3, and 4? One of the things I just want to remind the park commissioners as well as my fellow voters is that when we had the petition going out, say Park Avenue Beach, easily half of the people signing on to that petition were non-voters, but rather pedestrian users of the barge, going out there enjoying the views, fishing, sitting on the benches, what have you. So I think what we should look at as a repair strategy is one where we preserve the recreational aspect of the horizontal surface of whatever we put out there. And I was wondering, what is the difference in the size of the deck between 1 and 3?
Okay. The repair strategy is your existing barge is 35 feet across. We are proposing putting sheet pile on either side and putting concrete across the top of that. Sheet pile is going to be around 1.5 feet width, so we're already talking about 3 feet plus a residual widening it just widens the ends. It's the fill on the inside and the amount of concrete on the top. So that you can make any size you want. And of course, with the rubble fill option number 4, there is no pedestrian access. We would not recommend any type of walking surface on top of that.
But currently, as there's a proposed.
Yes.
On option 3, that's 8 feet.
It's 8 feet for two-way traffic,
Right.
and that's two-way walking traffic. Once you start putting benches down, you would want it a bit wider than that.
What would you recommend for benches and what have you, maybe 20 feet?
Oh, I think 20 feet's actually rather large.
A 20-foot area, that would, you have a large barge to start with, so 35 feet is a very nice, we would consider that almost like a public promenade.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So, you know, to have something that was on the order of 16 feet wide, to be able to have a surface down there that would be able to separate traffic versus public pedestrian use traffic, 16 feet is probably a minimum that I'd say if you wanted to start putting benches and things like that. Well, that adds 8 feet, so it adds up about $160,000 for the price.
Right. And there is a savings from removing the riprap as well.
Right. So you have, the difference in cost between 1 and 3 right now is approximately $200,000.
Yes.
But it's even if you make it 8, they only figured it 8 feet.
Right.
At 16 feet, now you're the same cost.
Whatever, we can have this discussion later, but it would be my recommendation that the park board consider having some kind of pedestrian deck out there to preserve the nature of the lakefront viewing for pedestrians. We did get a lot of interest. Like I said, almost half the people who signed on to our petition really were concerned about going out on the barge, sitting out there. It is a recreation facility, not just for boaters, but for all users in Highland Park. So somewhere there's probably a happy medium between 1 and 3 to create a usable deck as well as maintain, if not increase, the size of the boat launch area.
Right.
Just like that, we take into consideration when we consider the various options.
I'm confused. Okay, so the barge is 35 feet wide.
Correct.
So are you talking about decking that entire 35-foot wide barge?
We are talking about placing sheet pile on either side. We're cutting down the existing barge, putting sheet pile in, and putting a concrete surface across that, which increases then the width.
Okay, so we're 35 feet, so what is this 8 feet? Where's the 8 feet come in?
Why don't you go back
Oh.
to
That's option
Yep.
3.
Option 3 is shown here at 8 feet wide.
So what's 8 feet wide?
8 feet is from edge to edge.
Cal, think of
I'm
taking
confused.
Excuse me,
I'm
take
sorry.
a shoebox. Cal,
Okay.
take a shoebox.
Yes.
Yeah.
Turn it
Okay,
on its
so
side.
This is option number 1. This is 35 feet across.
Oh, I got it. So that's option 1. That's option 1.
Correct. Then we have the sheet pile on either side.
Okay, so option 3, it's not 35 feet apart.
Correct.
It's only 8 feet apart.
It's shown at 8 feet apart.
Now I understand. Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Thank you, okay.
Yes. The biggest difference, to your point, of
Take a shoebox.
option 3 to option 1 is option 1 leaves the barge in place. So option 3 does include a cost of removal of that existing barge, but allows you to widen your ramp as well to accommodate a float or additional boarding dock or something of that sort. And the permitting time is about the same. Yeah, it's installing sheet pile,
All right,
so it's
so
about the same.
just so I understand, again, the cellular sheet pile, that's a 1.4, we'll call it.
Yes.
But if we wanted to widen it to 16 feet, that's adding an additional, how much?
That would be
about $160,000.
160,000.
So that would put that at 1,560,000, where it's very similar to the repairs, which is number 1, but number 1 gives you a 35-foot wide.
Gives you about 37, 38 foot wide.
Okay, so I understand this? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Okay.
Yes. Now, option 3 also includes the riprap in the front, and if you were to remove that riprap, your savings is a little over 100,000,
So
which makes it very similar then to option 1.
1, do you need the riprap?
Option 1 does not. Option 1 just includes the salvaged stone that is placed again back as scour stone in front of the system.
And why is there no riprap in option 1?
There was no need to extend further out into the water as it could become a navigational issue. In option 3, it does not extend beyond your current promenade. It is tucked behind.
So that's
and
why
therefore,
you're suggesting the riprap.
correct.
I
And it also reduces the agitation not only in front of, but in the lee side within the ramp area.
And with option 1, you don't have to worry about that.
Option 1, you've never had it. It's not going to change the agitation within your
Okay,
ramp.
I understand.
I have a question for our staff as far as access to Park Avenue. You know, this idea that people who signed the petition, you know, they're non-voters and they just wanted Park Avenue open. But what are the restrictions as to when non-voters can access Park Avenue Beach? Know that? Yeah. Because I know, for example, one time I drove down there and I wasn't allowed to go down because there's a parking restriction. So could people actually walk? Okay.
It's a lot of money.
During the week and evenings.
Okay.
Would you like to speak? Francis?
Look at Dan.
Hi, Francis Peshek, on Bristol Tower Speak. I have a question regarding permitting. Once you obtain the permit, is there a time that it expires and then you need to re-permit?
Yes. Permits are usually given for about a 2-year construction window, and they can be extended, but they're not infinite because they want to make sure that you're actually going to do what you said you're going to do. So as long as you start construction with it in that window, it's easy to extend it.
Now, you mentioned that if we do nothing,
Yes.
the option of do nothing, it should, the leeward side should stay safe, should stay in place, perhaps, but we don't really know because we couldn't see the bottom because of the leeward.
Correct. There is an unidentified risk associated with doing nothing. So we cannot say how long it will last based on what we could see and the angle at which that lee side wall was at. We do not foresee an imminent threat of failure within the next winter cycle. We do say that within time you will start to see that wall fall or bend backward and eventually fail. And what that will do will allow wave energy to pass through and into the boat launch area.
Now, would you suggest that the Park District maybe plan on getting the permitting done since it's quite a lengthy process, 6 to 8 months on the 2 options, sounds like. And then if something were to happen, at least it would be ready to go and Terrence Smith might be gone. Maybe.
Yes. The permits, though, have to be based on a known design and methodology for construction. So we can't just go to a permitter and say, we're doing something. We have to say, we're putting in a cellular sheet pile, this is the width, this is the footprint, this is how we anticipate the construction happening, this is our erosion control measures, these are the areas that are affected. We need to know all of that to get a permit. If we were to start that process now and we had a permit 8 months from now, you don't have to start construction right away. You can wait until you see further degradation of what you have and then have that permit in your back pocket to be ready to go. There's no relation between the two, but you cannot start construction until you have the permit.
And last question, based on the history of putting in these materials.
Yes.
For number 1 and 3, what are the yearly maintenance costs if done yearly?
If done yearly,
Maintenance, just to make sure to check there are no cracks, and I assume we have to hire a diver.
Right, so on a cellular sheet pile structure, we normally do not do yearly maintenance on them, right? So you're gonna have a concrete surface on them, and we'd expect that it would be cleaned by park staff, and what they normally would do to a concrete surface in a situation like that.
right?
But as far as going down and doing a dive inspection of that, it's a visual walkthrough that is done just by staff seeing what's going on.
Right.
We usually inspect structures like this on a 15 to a 20-year interval to see how they're doing.
And what's that cost?
That's,
A dive inspection?
a dive inspection can be $4,000 to $5,000, but
Every 15.
15 to 20 years.
Right. Now, if there was a catastrophic event of something large hitting it, you might ask us to come out and do a dive survey to make sure that the sheets haven't split and that there is fill material exiting. But that would be on the rare event.
What are you talking about?
I mean, a very large vessel or barge or something hits the side of the system and dents it in. That's catastrophic because that can break the connection of the sheet. And then we would want to take a look. You'd want someone to take a look.
We'd be calling the insurance company when that happens.
We would
so-
too, yeah. That person's insurance company. The money for the scrap? Normally, it's actually, the contractor will include it in their line items, so they will reduce it then from their costs.
Well, these costs include engineering, they're gross amounts, there's no cost.
There is engineering and a contingency based in that breakdown of costs. So yes, these do include the cost of permits, engineering, bonds, I believe was in there, and
General overhead bonds.
general
And
contingency. At this point, yeah, I don't know that I included the escalator, but at this point I did include a contingency of 20%, which is pretty healthy. As we went through the design, that contingency would be able to come down as we knew more about the system.
Okay. Brett Tolpin?
Brett Colvin, 283 Leslie Lane. Fortunately, most of my questions have been answered, so I'm just going to say, very nice job on the presentation. And for the board, I appreciate you guys taking the long view of this. You know, looking at the numbers amortized per year, you know, it's almost like all the options kind of come out the same. So it's really becomes a question of budget now. And obviously, everyone's moving, you know, was moving to 3 and now maybe 1 and 3. My question is, my mind tends to go to 4 just because I think we're in the budget, right? And I don't want to be too dismissive of number 4 in case there isn't money right now for this or that determination comes up later. And I certainly hope there is, you know, passionately with all my yacht club friends, and I'm a boater, and you know, we all want this to last a long time. 70 years is a lifetime. Not only for a barge, but frankly, the first friends. That's pretty great. But as far as the rubble fill at H piles, and I was looking at the picture. The first question I have is, you look all around Lake Michigan, and I've been all around the Great Lakes. Most of the time you see really big boulders, right? That walks, you know, the waves and all that. These are little boulders. Little boulders that could possibly get scattered in a storm. Why that material composition versus the big boulders that you typically see as solid and unmovable?
Right. I believe that this was a limitation of our graphics person to find big boulders in an image that would fit the perspective of the image of the photograph that I gave him. As I mentioned briefly, we're sizing the rocks to be at least 2.5 feet in diameter. So we're looking at much larger rocks than, I guess, what is visually depicted. The larger we go, the more stable they are, but also the larger the pores for wave energy to pass through. So as you might know, a breakwater, the most important part of it is the core. It's a tiny particles that are all held together because that's what returns the energy. All that big stuff you see on top, that just holds it all in place. It's not as important as that small stuff that is rejecting the energy. So the larger we get, the more energy is actually passing through. To remain in place, we would need at least a 2.5, if not larger, stone size. That would be determined later.
Okay, well, thank you for that answer.
Yeah.
One other question, again, focusing on 4 as a alternative to 1 and 3, not my preference, but, you know. I'm looking at that picture, and what boaters do, for all of you who aren't boaters, is late in the day or at night, we pull up to the side of that, and we've been bouncing around all day, and we jump off. And our balance isn't great, right? I look at that, like we all, it's already been commented, and it's not a particular safe structure to jump on, and I understand that there could be something attached to it, but is there a possibility of filling concrete or some other way to kind of extend over, or would that just break up because of the movement of the rocks eventually? Or could that be done maybe after the rocks settle in a couple of years?
My concern again is because of the uplift of wave forces as waves pass through there. You will still see, even with the rocks in there, you'll see a lot of breaking on the rocks themselves, but the wave energy that passes through, we were there on a very calm day, yet any wave energy that entered into the cargo box hit that back wall and splashed up in the air. So you have upward motion and upward force of wave energy. If you were to place some type of walkway surface there, you would have that constant uplift as well. Now, there can be pressure release points and whatnot, but overall, the structure remains a bit dangerous to access now. There are a number of bollards and cleats and whatever else that are generally just walking, they're tripping hazards. And so we would not recommend using it as a walking surface. In fact, I think I mentioned that the Jersey barriers or a fence would still need to remain in place just to keep people from falling in and getting hurt on what is now exposed steel.
Thanks.
Okay. Last but not least, Megan.
Hello, my name is Megan Galfoot. I live at 2744 Sheridan Road. And thank you very much for hiring this firm. I thought they did a really great job, and I read the entire report earlier today. I apologize if some of my comments are redundant, because I had to step out for a few minutes. But I had a question, a comment, and then out of the boat, it is, I think, everybody safer to be able to step out and down onto another dock as opposed to up onto the current barge, which is, I don't know, like a couple feet, above the water
It is, yeah.
level. So it kind of climb out on a ladder, and it's a little bit awkward and can be potentially a little bit dangerous. And then, I'm sorry if you touched on this already, but I was just wondering what the next steps are in sort of this process going forward. So thank you very much.
Okay. Does anybody else wish to speak?
Hi, I'm Dan Hirsch. I live at 276 Walker. Thank you. I probably don't need a microphone. I just wonder, we looked at encapsulating all three sides of the barns with sheet pile,
Yes.
but we determined that the inside wall, the east wall or the west wall was intact. Why couldn't you just encapsulate two sides, fill it back up with new fill, with new concrete on it, and it's basically back the way it was, only we still have 35 feet wide, which I think is wonderful and very accessible for everyone, and I think to shrink it to only 8 or even 10 feet wide, we're giving up a ton of real estate, and I really question whether 8 feet is adequate to withstand the wave energy. I just think I've seen them punishing waves down there, and in the winter there's ice against it. I think we need something a little more substantial if it's going to last. And I'm leaning towards number one, but if we have determined that the barge was basically intact, couldn't we get 95% of it by only encapsulating two and maybe reducing the cost? I mean, we're not comparing apples to apples with 1 and 3 because we're giving up a mountain of real estate. And if you stood out there on an 8-foot break wall, you'd feel pretty exposed. And I just question whether, that's enough. So could we look at a cost option where we only encapsulate 2 sides?
Okay.
Or is that not even feasible?
I'm going to answer your questions in reverse.
Okay.
So, and forgive me if I'm forgetting a little of this, but here's a picture that shows the embedment of the sheet pile. Now, sheet pile like this, where it's tied together, creates a box, and it holds itself together, especially once you put the fill on the inside, it pushes it out. Everything becomes a solid piece. In this image, you were saying about the 8 feet, if that is enough. The ground level is here, so we have embedment down into the soil. To turn that whole system over would take a very large event. So this has been sized for the 100-year events, the statistical 100-year events, just for conceptual purposes, and this was deemed to be deep enough to hold that whole system together. Now, if we look back at the first option, the question was, can we encapsulate it on 3 sides? Well, in the site inspection, we determined that the remaining steel of the cargo box was rather weak. It is constantly moving with that wave energy, and every time it gets hit, it moves and shifts a little bit, which is why we saw a number of cracks that were welded. Sorry, let's see if I can find one here. Well, we saw a number of cracks such as this that were welded shut that had just opened right back up because of the constant shifting and moving of the system itself. Now, because this steel is so thin, we were unable to tie new sheet pile into the old sheet pile, which meant it wasn't holding itself together the way it is when it becomes a box, which means it's now acting as a cantilever. So now we have a cantilever sheet pile with waves hitting it and nothing supporting it on the other side. We have the interior filled with rubble that is pushing out against it, again, with no support on the backside. So it's not tying into anything. So that sheet pile would not only need to be much larger, but driven much further down into the bed. This is act holistically then. You have a barge on one side doing what it does, and then you have your sheet pile cantilever. The two aren't actually tied together. So in the end, when we started looking at costing and sizing of sheet pile, it made more sense to encapsulate the entire system so that there wasn't a break in the system either. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
I think it's extremely valuable real estate.
Dock or floating dock or fixed dock off the side, you are taking away the public and the boaters conflicting with each other in that system, right? So it is an 8-foot wide walkway. It's smaller than it currently is, I get it, but you're taking away the boaters that are coming in to launch or retrieve, that they have their own walkway at that point that they're able to go up the ramp. So you're not necessarily having the conflict of people coming in on and off their boats within that 8-foot if that cantilever dock or the floating dock is happening. So,
And I guess one thing I should point out, if it wasn't obvious, is that with a smaller width structure, we do not need to put the edge of it right along there. We can actually push it further out here, widen the boat launch itself so that you can fit a float or something else on the lee side. I don't know that there is a requirement to increase the size of the ramp to an additional lane, but you at least have that additional float for boarding and egress and onboarding. I'm trying not to call on people.
So,
Can you state your name and address, please?
Hi, my name is Mrs. Sweet, 100 Carnegie. I may be missing something. Is there an eastward limit to how far you can go? Because it seems like we're talking, aside from money, which is considerable,
A little bit in reverse. Your question about impinging on the boat launch itself?
no, it seemed like we were talking
Oh,
either or. Either
35.
or both launch.
There is a floating dock adjacent on the west side of that cellular sheet pile. Now, we would put the floating dock in line with the edge of the existing dock, so it doesn't impinge on the boat launch at all, which means that the structure itself would be somewhere down the middle. Now, that can widen as much as you like, but once it starts to extend beyond here, well, then you're starting to capture some sediment and whatever else on that side, which limit is a soft word because we can go as far as we like, but those negative effects will be brought up by the regulators as it does start to capture a bit more sediment.
How many feet could you sensibly go?
Well, I guess I'll jump in. If we say that the current margin is 35 feet, we wanted to have a gangway or a floating dock or something on that side.
6
We would
feet.
say 6 feet plus a little bit for the attachment. We'd be looking at a total width of a concrete surface to stay within the existing footprint of about 28, 29 feet. Okay?
So you have 8 feet.
Yep.
If we're talking about concept number 3, you have 8 feet.
Concept number 3, we would say
8
6
feet?
feet for a floating, for a dock.
Okay.
That would be along the side. And then we could go up to a total of that 6 feet plus X equals 35, right? We really want to stay within the footprint of that existing barge
Got it.
because we get outside of that, the permitting gets larger, and then the whole connection at that, I guess, that northeast corner.
Becomes more
We don't want
difficult.
that to stick out any farther. When we go in for permits, we want to say
Excellent.
we are not getting any larger
Sure.
than we were. So that means the biggest, if we wanted a floating dock on the side or a fixed cantilevered adjustable dock of some sort, we'd be looking at a total of about 28 feet of concrete deck, amenity deck.
And how much does a floating dock or a cantilever deck cost?
We said it's about $60,000.
So 60. So if you did the 35-foot, which is encapsulating, repairing the existing, do you still need a floating dock?
No,
Or
it would look exactly like it is right now.
so you don't need a floating dock?
There isn't room for a floating dock.
So
There wouldn't be room.
Okay, so I get there's no room, but is it more optimal to, again, I'm not a boater, is it more optimal to have 35 feet and no floating dock or shorter with a floating dock?
As a person that does this, my opinion would be, it would be better to provide a dock, a boarding dock of some sort for the boaters and an amenity deck that would be non-public, or that would be public use, separated from what the boaters would be. That would be my recommendation for that.
And at 35 feet, when it's not, they're not separated? You're not saying that you're...
They're not
They are-
separated now.
They're not separated now?
Right,
Correct.
they're not separated now.
Okay, I understand.
Okay,
Yes.
yes, ma'am.
How much is permitting on all four options? And
second question, and of those four options, which are ADA accessible?
Well,
Per-
all of the options would be ADA accessible. It's something that we have to do.
Yes.
We don't have an option to decide we don't want to. So that really wouldn't be an issue. Boarding docks are covered under a couple of different codes within the ADA, but because they're boating docks, we have some slopes that are always greater than that, what we call 12 to 1 inch per foot. We can go steeper than that for boarding docks for boats. We can actually follow the slope of your ramp. Okay? When it comes to the permitting side, if we are not going through and extending the tip of this longer, the cost of the permits is really not going to be any different. They're all gonna be
Right.
the same.
They're all
They
the
just take a
same.
little bit longer.
Except for floor, which you hope is just the time.
It's just fine.
Right.
That's all it is.
But let me just get, one of the things I may have misheard, we can't
Stay intact for next season. However, you never know when the 100-year storm does arrive.
Correct.
We should be prepared.
I'm not quite sure what you mean by be prepared. We're not going to have the permit, we're not going to have the permit and plans and everything in place for this next boating season.
But are you?
It's going to be the
decide
season
on what
after.
the-
Oh, yeah, we're going to decide that within a month.
So then why start the permitting process?
Because you don't have plans, you need plans, we haven't made a decision on concept 1, 2, 3, or 4, 5, 6, or 7, if we ask for three more options. We can't just go ask for, Margaret told us that, we can't just go ask for a permit and then do the
So
work.
you're going to decide on one of the options within the month, correct?
And then they will start the permit.
Well,
the-
let's not get carried
Yes.
away on
Yeah,
that, because
let's-
we still have to discuss it. This is the first time we've heard it in this setting. We still need to discuss it. So pursuant to the Open Meetings Act, we can't have the discussion without a meeting being called and discussing this in public. We're hearing the information, just like you're hearing from the information. We have some decisions to make about getting to the question before about process. We don't know what the process is, because that's going to be the next conversation we have. We'll have it tonight, but that's the next conversation after we get done hearing from the consultants that we've hired.
Let me just ask one question that may have been sort of avoided. How much time is necessary to prepare the plans to be ready to apply for the permit? Or is that within the 6 to 8 months of the permitting process that you have?
Well, the options are a little bit different. If you were moving ahead with just the rubble fill, that is the most straightforward. We would size the rock, put together about 35% drawings and information so that the regulators can make a decision. If you were moving ahead with an option of a brand-new structure and wanted to tailor it for dredging, reduction, for beach enhancement, well, then we would have to do a numerical model, and that would take about 1.5 to 2 months with then reviews and talks, which then just extends us to the point where we start putting together those drawings, because that has to go as background material for the permits as well. So we could be ready with 35% drawings for the most simplistic, straightforward, within a month, where if we have to do additional analysis, that could stretch to about 3 or 4.
But all within the time frame of permit in 2019 and either construction at the end of 2019 or into 2020?
Yes, I would assume that the longest permit being the barge replacement, which I don't believe is really on the table anyway, could push us into 2020 to get a permit for that. But again, we can still be in the process of waiting for a permit and still pushing forward and selecting a contractor.
Thank you.
Okay, step 2. Do any of the commissioners have any questions, any additional information they want, or anything that they need? Okay, hearing none, I am going to suggest that we, all right, I'm thinking out loud. I'm going to suggest that we digest this information and then we come back in 2 weeks at our next meeting and have a meaningful conversation about the 4 options and where we as a board want to start going with this.
That's fine with me.
Okay, here's my suggestion, and I agree with that, Brian. My suggestion is that, there's a lot of information received, in the last couple days. We heard a lot of public comments with regard to this. I'm glad we're doing this the same night that we talked about our 5-year capital plan, because we have to figure out how to afford this. And I think that anything we do at Park Avenue with regard to the barge should be included within the 5-year capital plan. We don't just do things on an ad hoc basis, where we just say, okay, let's go spend $1 million on something. I think we need to do it in conjunction with everything else that we're doing within the district, and that's why I think it was very productive that we had this discussion the same night we talked about our 5-year capital plan. So I think, let's think about it over the next couple of weeks. We'll come back and talk about it, and then we can kind of like try to see if there's a consensus on one of the different concepts moving forward, and then we could then figure out how we pay for it, and maybe refer that to the finance committee, have another meeting of the finance committee, because when does the capital plan have to be approved? Liza?
Well, it will need to be approved with the budget we're presenting the budget in November. So we're presenting the draft budget to the finance committee October 26th, if I'm correct.
And is that before or after our next meeting?
October 26th would be after our next meeting.
That's just perfect then. So that works out great. So let's discuss this at our next meeting, and then we can refer it to our finance committee, and then we'll figure out how we pay for it.
And then come back again.
And come back again at that point.
Yes, David?
Mr. President, I would just request that you consider directing the engineering company to look at alternative costs for option 3 with a wider deck. So when you deliberate this, that they update their numbers accordingly. Right now it's an 8-foot deck. Let's say
And
it's a 20-foot deck.
I think they gave us a cost of $150,000.
About $20,000 per.
Linear
foot that
foot.
goes wide.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's at the 195 linear feet long.
I think, so we're talking about $150,000, $160,000 to extend it.
Correct.
To
The width, yes.
So
to widen it.
So are we saying that 3 is no longer an option? 3,
No,
because
we're
adding?
No.
Yeah.
What we're saying is, we as a board are going to take all the information we got today, tonight, everything the public said, digest it. When we come back at our next meeting in 2 weeks, or the 23rd, then have a conversation about.
But I guess what I want to know is, in hearing your input, you're saying 3 really doesn't work. You'd rather us go for the additional
No.
space?
No.
I think what they're saying, Lori, there should be like 3A and 3B.
Yeah.
3A would be at 8 feet, 3B would be at a larger.
Okay.
So that's what we're kind of
So
saying.
3 would work, but
Yeah, which,
3B
no,
would be ideal.
yeah, better. Yeah.
Okay.
You should go home.
Moving to our next topic, review of vouchers, and that Curtis to succinctly present.
So what's the next meeting, Liza? It's,
October
The next
23rd.
meeting is October 23rd.
and at what time?
At 6 o'clock.
Okay, thank you. 6 o'clock. Thank you. Thank you for all your,
Yes, Margaret, thank
your
you.
presentation. It was
That was
very helpful. Thank you for coming.
We're going to take a long time or take a break?
We're going to do vouchers. We'll get out of it. And that,
Thank you.
okay. Thank you. Well, we're open to the public to address the board on any other issues. Going once, going twice, done.
Move to adjourn? Hope, there's something else? Oh,
Is there anything else?
hope we have no closed session tonight.
No. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
No.
So that we're adjourned at 9:30. I hope to sleep by 9:45.
Thank you.